Hi, my name is Ken Asselson, and this is a short video describing a new feature I just put up. And it's basically based on using bacteria association. Bacteria can be friends or foes to each other, or actually neutral. And what we have done is from the 2,500 plus samples which we uploaded, we managed to identify some of these associations. The joy of the association is we may not know what increases a particular bacteria, but we suddenly know what other bacteria increases it or decreases it, and thereby, if we don't know from a clinical study what actually produces it, we can look at these other ones and say, okay, can we figure out from those things what will increase this bacteria, which we have no information from, no clinical studies, but we do have a very reasonable mathematical model. So let's take a look at it. And first of all, let's see, how do we get the association? It's been done by looking at every pair of bacteria which are found in the same sample and running a regression between them. Potentially that's 17,727 by 17,726 sets of computation. 314 million regressions have to be executed. Fortunately, I now have a dedicated PC, which is pretty high powered, to sit and let things run for hours or days or even weeks, as I recently have been forced to do. So I can go in and do nasty, horrendous calculations and see what the results are. And what we do is we get the slope and the regression coefficient. And regression coefficient explains how much of the changes in one accounts for the other. And we have 2,500 samples at the moment, and that is always going up. And to do a quick example, I'm going to go and look at two of them. These are both genus. And the catch is, because they are genus, they are independent of each other. As in, they aren't, one is not a child of the other. These are siblings, first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, fourth cousin. So they're not grandparents or daughters or granddaughters of them. They are independent of the same generation of bacteria. So it's like saying, okay, let's look at what my cousin. In a more human pattern, we can say, let's look at you and your cousins, and let's look at two things. A, how much you earn on average. And if you look at enough cousins together, you may find that cousins tend to earn more, or earn similar amounts, often a factor of parents' DNA, attitude, values, education, which tends to cluster by cousins or siblings. In fact, siblings is more extreme because you have the same DNA. You usually have similar educational opportunities, and the salary is likely to be very similar as a result. You can also look at other things such as medical conditions or risk of getting prostate cancer or becoming diabetic. Again, those tends to have associations between cousins or second cousins or third cousins, and that's what we are doing, except we're using bacteria, not people. And here are the two genuses I've done. I've gone and I charted on a chart all the values, and I did a bit of scaling. To make things easier to understand, I scale so that the maximum value of either one is 100, and then I scale downwards from there. So everything is scaled between value of 0 and 100. And one of the reasons is sometimes the bacterial count can get so out of sight that the chart is less easy to interpret. In this case, we see a very lovely chart here. When we have a low amount, then there's a bit of scatter, but as the number goes up, things just get locked in, and the two of them go up lockstep with each other. Smaller amounts, they bounce around, but the interesting thing is, look here, bounce around for only one of the bacteria, but never flips except for one single point, which is here. The stuff is always below the other line. So it's sort of a real interesting one, which means that probably it means that what one bacteria uses, the other bacteria is producing. And the result is, if you don't get the magic producer, you don't get the population on the other side. So that's an example of doing it. And this is pulling data from the upload the samples from people. So it's there. Not all the lines are as clean. This one is sweet. It's sort of clear. It jumps out of you saying, hey, there's associations there. And they are relatively independent. You can go and look them up. And you see that they're not that close to each other. Okay, now, one of the whole thing about microbiome prescription is looking at clinical studies and looking to see what increases a particular bacteria and what decreases another bacteria. More or less as you. One thing may increase one and one may decrease the other. So that is how we build suggestions, by looking at the clinical study, seeing that there have been changes happening. Very simple, very clean, and of course, being an open data source person, there are links available to each of the studies I'm using to get this information from, if you really want to do a lot of reading. Okay, what we now do is we have a target bacteria and we have nothing. There's nothing which says good or bad foods. Absolutely nothing. In other words, traditionally we'd be clueless. However, because we have associations, some of them are friends, which means if the friend goes up, the target goes up. Others are enemy. If the enemy goes up, the target goes down. And for each one of these targets, in this case, we just show a small number of 4. I'll come back to that in a moment. And we see the good items and the bad items, good items and bad items. So that's how we do it. We just simply go through that and calculate out which, in average, which things would likely compute or result in the target bacteria going up. So, nice and simple conceptually. The key thing is everything is coming from a clinical study. Key thing to remember is the values showing up are not the degree of effectiveness. These values come from the number of studies showing the effect. Different studies often have contradictory effects. And the best way to be safe or to be most secure in choices is by simply counting up the number of studies. If just one study says it increases it, that's nice. But if 15 studies says it increases it, which one could you trust more? I'm going to trust the one that says 15 studies. And that is part of how the AI on the site uses. It goes after the number of studies finding a particular type of result. And so with that as the basic information, we infer from regression what would likely to increase and decrease our target, which is right here. And then we aggregate all the data. Now, for aggregation, let's look at some of the numbers. Here, we have just 4, and perhaps 1 or 2. Nice and easy. In reality, some bacteria has 594 associations. In other words, there'd be 594 circles around this one. Gets busy. And some bacteria has 1,500 modifiers. In other words, the good and the bad together would be 1,500 different items. So we have almost 600 here, and then we have 1,500 for each one of them, and now we have to put it all together. And basically, worst case scenario doesn't actually happen, but potentially it could. We end up to determine what will increase or decrease one bacteria. We end up with a whopping 891,000 per bacteria. And remember, we are talking about 17,000 bacteria, which means to do everything is 17,000 times 8, almost a million. So we're talking about 17 billion calculations to get the net result, which is now available on the website. Thank you, computers. I would not want to do that by hand. Okay, so that is basically it. Now I'm going to hop over and show you on the website. Okay, we're on the site, and if we do look up bacteria, and we'll just run with the common lactobacillus, which is right there, and you go down, and you have this long list of items which increases. Because there are items from clinical studies, which is a class 1 suggestion, we don't show these associated. It just, it's not there. However, if we go over to a different bacteria, and let's find it. Here we have it, and what we see is down here, and we should make that a little bit easier to read, but I will on the next push. We end up having the values there. We click here, and we now have those values there. So the criteria is if there are less than 5 items available from clinical studies, 0 is less than 5, then we show the link. If there are more than 5, we keep with conservative existing clinical studies to determine things. And by the way, the numbers here, the highest value is scaled to be 100. So it could go from positive 100 to minus 100. Some cases, like here, you only find things that inhibits it. So if you are trying to increase it, then you want to take those things out of your diet if you have them in your diet. Otherwise, you would want to add them in. So that's basically it. You'll find frequently they are somewhat similar to each other because they seem to be some patterns I've been noticing that. But that's basically it. If you have if there's information from clinical studies, that's what you get. If there's not information from clinical studies, there is the option, and potentially you could get up to I think 100 or 200 items listed. The highest value will be 100, either positive or negative, and the lowest values that will be listed is 1 or minus 1. In other words, 100 for the highest value. Anything below that, I basically said, okay, just creating noise for people. Okay, that's it.